things. So first we have Greg Emerick. Greg is the Director of New Strategic Ventures and a co-founder of Sentera. He is responsible for cultivating Sentera's global marketing strategy for remote sensing and analytics solutions in agriculture, especially for specialty and permanent crops. We have Todd Colten. Todd is the Chief Aerospace Engineer and also a co-founder of Sentera. He has extensive experience in UAVs from military to commercial applications. He was responsible for Sentera's authorization from the FAA to begin commercial application and operations of its UAVs for precision agriculture, infrastructure inspection, and emergency response. And then finally, we have Monika Chandler. Monika is a research scientist at the Minnesota Department of Agriculture, where she works on biological control of terrestrial invasive species and other noxious weeds. Monika is a key implementation partner with several MIT PPC-funded research projects. So welcome. Thank you.
All right. So thank you for the introductions, and thanks to the panelists. So as was pointed out, I'm an aerospace engineer. There's a UAV laboratory in the aerospace engineering department that I run, and what we do is build small UAVs and the electronics that go with them. Actually, I don't build them. People like Kurt Olson sitting up there do that. And this is one UAV we built for a project that Rob was talking about. It's called the Drosophilinator. So if people want to know more about it, ask Kurt afterwards. That's all I'm going to say. So the point of this panel is, at least what we thought we would talk about, is the following. It's a kind of a theme that's come up several times during the talk this morning. It's basically, what are the roadblocks to making UAVs basically a turnkey technology for use in pest management? So our panelists will give a short brief, I guess maybe a couple of minutes, on their take on that. And then we'll have a free flow discussion where questions from the audience and from myself to basically tease out what are the issues that we need to address before making these UAVs useful tools, turnkey solutions in pest management. So that's the idea. With that, let me bring up the slides. I'll let Monika start. And I'll bring up your slides here. If I can get to them.
So do you want me to start talking
Yes, go ahead.
about these slides? Okay,
Yes.
So just briefly how we've been using aerial survey. We started using aerial survey for the detection of Oriental bittersweet. This is an invasive woody vine. It climbs up into tree canopies and it will devastate a forest. The vine weight combined with ice, snow, high winds just breaks trees off. The species composition decreases rapidly in Oriental bittersweet infestations. Basically, we will not have forests if we have Oriental bittersweet infestations. So this is an eradicate list species. This is a really very important species for us to be able to find and eliminate before it can spread. And so, so we began with this project to find Oriental bittersweet. And originally we thought we were going to try to find the needle in the haystack. We were working in southeastern Minnesota, which is bluff country. It's very forested. It's very difficult to walk around these areas. And so we thought we'd find, you know, maybe isolated vines here and there. And what we learned is that aerial survey turned out to be a great tool for management as well as detection. So if you go to the next slide, you can see that here are the fruiting vines up in the canopy. So they have this red fruit with bright yellow fruit capsules. And you can see them here in the trees. And they turned out to be very easy to identify, particularly when we had that little bit of snow on the ground. We had really good contrast. So this is using just basic imagery. We were able to find this, and then we would get the latitude and longitude for each of these vines that were identified. We could send in a Conservation Corps field specialist to go in to these specific locations. They would note whether the vines were, or whether the plants were Oriental bittersweet, And if they were, they would cut and treat them and move on. And so this became a containment strategy for us, because if we can take out all the fruiting vines, we can reduce the spread of seed, because the seed is in the fruit. Birds can eat the fruit and therefore spread the seed to new areas. So we developed this containment strategy after we got started. So there are separate male and female plants. We knew we couldn't get the entire infestations. We just don't have the person capacity to be able to do that all at once. So as a strategy, based upon aerial survey, we just started taking out female plants. So, you know, this is something that as we work with aerial survey, we start to learn new and different ways that we can use this. Then we're quite different from when we started. So that's just an overview of one project that we're working on. And then we're also working on Palmer amaranth detection with aerial survey, and that has been far more challenging to identify green plants often growing amongst green grasses, and so that's been harder. But I'll stop now.
All right, so next is Todd. Do you want me to queue up these slides, or do you want to come here? Okay, all right. Either way, it's up to you.
Yep. If you have,
It's right here.
perfect.
Let's see. It's like a screen mode. Yeah, it will work. Cool. Wake up. There it is.
Perfect.
All right.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. I'm just going to do a really quick introduction to Sentera. I'm Todd Colten. I'm the Chief Aerospace Engineer at Sentera, and I've got my colleague Greg Emerick up here as well. Some of you guys have heard of us. It was really kind of cool to see some of the presenters earlier this morning talk about using some of our products. I recognize a lot of faces in the room. For those of you that aren't familiar with Sentera, I'll give you a really quick overview and background of what we do kind of from a technology side with remote sensing, imagers, and technology. So Sentera's been around for about 5 years. We founded in 2014 by a group of former Lockheed Martin aerospace, or not aerospace engineers, but Lockheed Martin engineers that did drones. So we were doing drones for other applications in the previous decade. We started in 2014, have really kind of founded the company on focusing on using this type of technology for precision agriculture, wildlife management, and other applications, other commercial applications. We're up to over 50 people today, so it's been a nice steady growth and growing on, going on about 5 years. So we do drones, we do sensors or imaging sensors that go on drones, and that's mostly what I'll talk about here. We do analytics and software, and Greg will talk about some of the projects we're running, particularly with conservation, wildlife management, invasive species work, that really talks into analyzing the data using our analytics and software. Why use drones for agricultural analytics? This has been referenced by every speaker yet today, but it's all about getting different levels of resolution. So satellite imagery is great for lots of broad area applications. Airplanes have a role as well, traditional aircraft, but drones you can really get low level, high resolution. I'll talk about some of the different sensors we make today, but it's really all about spatial resolution and getting the detail. And even within Sentera and our sensor lines, we have different sensors that take it from, it might be centimeter level resolution, maybe 10 centimeters per pixel. That's great, that blows away anything the satellite could do, all the way down to half centimeter or even millimeter level resolution on imagery for certain applications. And if we're talking about, like what Monika just mentioned, we're trying to zoom in and see really specific leaf detail or seed detail or fruit detail on plants, sometimes you need millimeter level or at least half centimeter level resolution. So that's sort of what we do. So we make a range or a line of different multispectral sensors, ranging from really small, super small, lightweight, relatively affordable, kind of in the $1,000 class, all the way up to multi-camera arrays that might be $5,000 to $10,000 in price. But we really sort of avoid the hyperspectral or the next level up, which would be scientific grade, or you're talking about $50,000 or even $100,000 sensor suite. Our goal as a company is to take the work that's done at research institutions like this, find the use cases that have commercial potential, and figure out how to commercialize that and bring that down into more affordable, easier to use sensor products. And then again, matching the right sensor up with the right sort of drone. So there's different sizes of drones, just like there's different types of sensors and different types sizes of cameras. So you want to use the right drone, the right camera for the right application. And I think we'll probably touch on that a bit here in the discussion. And then this is just an example of how we're able to take our sensors. This is a really, I mean, you can hold it in your palm. It's a small, lightweight camera system, and we're able to pull out discrete individual wavelengths of light out of that 2-camera array. So I'm not going to go into too much more detail on what we do. It's just a quick background of what Sentera is all about. We've had a lot of good collaboration and partnership with some of the groups in the room here, and we're continue to move forward. So. I think I escaped out of that.
Let me queue up great slides if I can.
So maybe to dovetail onto what Todd was talking about there with that last image that he had up, a large portion of our business is technology you can't purchase on our website. We do a lot of customized sensor manufacturing and design and analytics production for all sorts of different customers. Our primary focus is really is on the sensor and the data that the sensor's collecting. So of course it's sensor design and development, all of which we do internally. And then along with that, machine learning, computer vision, and then multispectral data analytics, and sometimes the combination of all of those. The 3 areas that we really focus in, the first one happens to be in row crops. That's where we got our start. When Sentera first got started, we took technology that we had acquired when we started the company and commercialized it for agricultural applications, and was really sort of the launch point for us in being able to produce some simple indices and really start to identify where there are potential issues in row crops. From that position, then it really started to grow from there. We started to figure out other areas that were problematic and things that people needed to solve, and we just literally started working on solving those types of things. So it's everything from counting plants to identifying weed locations, and then turning around and actually making economic decisions with the information. So we've tried to refine the process, collect the data, and then put it into a format where it can be consumed by all sorts of different technologies. Dan, you made a really good point earlier in the fact that technology needs to be, you don't want to put this in a silo and not be able to share this. We're firm believers in that, and making sure that the data that comes off of our sensors can be consumed with any other software tool. In most cases, people like to use ours, and we're happy about that, but if they don't, that's okay. We're still going to make sure that you're successful. That's a really important aspect of how we function and operate in our business. All right, so now here's the test, right? Look at that. So in row crops, one of the areas that we do focus on, and this came up earlier, and I wanted to make sure I pointed this out. When we start talking about, high-speed phenotyping and high throughput phenotyping and trying to figure out how to make and do a better job, that is a very consistent thing with what Sentera does and our customers and how they use our technology. This is just an example, a whole bunch of different small plots, and the goals typically are to take out error, and that error can come from just researcher bias, or it might be the fact that you get sick of running the clicker and you get it wrong, and eventually somebody transposes a number when they put it in. Those types of things become problematic, to working your way all the way through the system and being able to consume that with another software tool. And those are the kinds of things that we got started with and started working on, and that's really what got us to the point today where we've got all these different practical uses for our technology. I won't run through all of them, but the point being is we're doing things that actually you can take the data and then activate that data. Put it into an applicator, make a decision in some way, shape, or form that helps you adjust what you're going to apply or how you're going to do something that affects and makes an economic impact either on lower costs or greater production. In conservation, we're doing something that's really interesting. We started working with Monarch Joint Venture. Kyle's sitting in here today. With Monarch Joint Venture and USGS. And we're using both machine learning and multispectral data to help us. So the image on the left is just an indication of how difficult it would be to try and perform machine learning on that image because there's so much noise with all the other color. And if we use the appropriate filtering, we can now emphasize what we're trying to look at or mask out what we don't want to see in order for us to try and perform other machine learning or computer vision tactics or techniques. And so this is just an example of that. In conservation, however, we're doing a whole lot more. There's everything from just restoration projects to things that might be done in and around water, identifying invasive species. There are all sorts of different things that we're working on there and all sorts of different customers that we're working with. And these are just a handful of those examples. And again, much of this is stuff being done with our standard products, but there are also things that can be done with unique applications of our technology and using it for something specific and customized for a certain application. The last piece and the last slide for me is just, it's about what we're doing in permanent crops. And so an example of that and an example of what all of you are doing, or many of you are doing, is there's all this important research, but oftentimes it's hard to commercialize that, or it gets to a point where you can't, and that's something that we've gotten pretty good at doing. So an example of that, this happens to be a bunch of almond trees, but we're doing quite a bit in citrus, where HLB, Wan Long Bing, which is citrus greening, some of you shaking your heads, sounds like you are aware of what that is. Research was done. We've taken that research and turned it into a program or a project, and we're working with citrus organizations as well as USDA and building a sensor that our expectations are, based on the research that we've done, that we're going to be able to identify pre-symptomatically HLB before you can see it with the naked eye. And again, it comes back to addressing things like oak wilt or those types of things in order to be able to do something more quickly and have higher efficacy in trying to treat or affect the outcomes. So I wanted to just give a broad overview. There are all sorts of specifics we can get into, but I thought if you could have an appreciation for what we're doing in row crops, the things that we're doing in conservation, as well as what we're doing in permanent crops, there's a lot of overlap and a lot of crossover for the things that I think you're doing here, and would love to answer those questions.
Thanks, Greg.
Yep.
All right, so to kick things off, I'll start with a question, and I'll direct it at Monika. So from all the work you've been doing with Oriental Bittersweet and Palmer and all the others, if you could, what is a big limitation with UAVs, which if you could magic wand away, you'd like to get rid of so to make it a more useful tool?
So currently, so when exploring this project, I sat down with my agency's person who keeps track of kind of what's happening with drone technology. And he sat me down and he said, okay, here's what you need. You need a license to be able to fly a drone. You need permission from your agency to be able to fly a drone. You need the technical knowledge to do it. He went through some of those specifics, and after a pretty short amount of time, I said, I can write a contract with the University of Minnesota. That is what I can do. So, which I'm so glad that I did. So that's when I reached out to Demoz, and then also was connected with Kurt, and they have been the ones who have really got this project off the ground, literally. So for me, I have a ton of limitations as someone in a state agency in terms of, like, you need agency approval to utilize this technology. You need a lot of technical knowledge. So Kurt and the students that he works with, they will take an off-the-shelf aircraft, they 3D print parts for it, they know exactly how to trick it out to fly farther and faster and do all these great things. I would not begin to know how to do this. So, having something that's basically off the shelf, ready to go, that can do this really high quality work is great. And then also having the image processing software be very simple to use. So, someone like me, I use Google, right? I would love to use Google Earth with this, or something that I'm already really familiar with. We've had some trouble with some of the software limitations with licensing. Licenses can be very expensive, and so to have multiple people analyzing images, if they each need a license, that's an issue. So I think it's a challenge to think about how we get this from research into on-the-ground management.
All right, so with that, I'll now ask the question to Greg and Todd is, why is that a hard thing to magic wand away, or is it actually on its way out, all these limitations associated with things not being turnkey, things not being, I guess, open? What are the technology limitations that are making that, and are they going away? What's your perspective on that?
Yeah,
It's the same theme you've heard from a lot of people.
Right. So that's a very good point. And so this is if you look at the end-to-end process, like start to finish, it's actually pretty complicated and there's a lot of steps. And so in terms of the needing a license and regulation, I'm not sure if that's going away. That's probably, you need a license to drive your car. It's probably, you're going to need a license to fly a drone. You need a license to go put your canoe in the lake, you need, or at least a registration sticker. So that piece of it is probably here to stay. It'll evolve and may get better or easier, but it's still, you got to know the rules of the road. We live in a society, you have to not bump into each other, especially not in the air. So, but in terms of the rest of it, in terms of the technology, we're on a path of getting much better, and it's improving. The actual just getting out to a field and flying a drone is to the point now where, at least with our system, you can pull the drone out of the box, put it on the ground, put the battery in it, turn it on, you pull up your iPad, you got your map already sitting there from Google or Apple or whatever, you just trace out the shape of the field, and you hit one button, and it goes. And it literally is that easy for many of the use cases right now for flying fields. But that's just flying the drone. That used to be many, many steps and was really complicated, and we've got that down to like literally one button. But that's maybe only 10% of the problem. So now we got 90% of the problem, which is really what do you do with all the pictures you just took, and what do they mean? And how do you process them? And throughout this morning, people have talked about here some of the different processing steps that we take. So that's where there's a lot of opportunity. That's where there's a lot of work to be done, but also, like I said, opportunity because a lot of that can be automated. A lot of that can be made easier. The one thing that's still a interesting challenge that I find is just the volume of data. And the volume of data is never going to get less. It's always going to get more. And I'm not sure that the volume of data and just general computing or even file transfer or internet speeds, I'm not sure that they're ever going to catch up. Like we'll just always be collecting more data faster than we can move it around. So something that Sentera is really focused on, or that we see the wave of the future, is that it's going to have to be done. A lot of processing is going to have to be done on sensor, on board, in real time, before you even land. So that's where we see a lot of focus, and all the technology and solutions that are going to be required to put that in place is what we're focused on. Anyway.
Greg, do you want to add something to that?
Todd addressed most of the points. I think the one thing I would say is, and all of us in the room, if you've done any UAV operations at all, 5-6 years ago, these things fell out of the sky and they weren't very dependable and all that sort of stuff. And I think a lot of that's been solved. It's something you go out today and you expect things to fly and they work. And fortunately, we've made it even simpler. As an example, I don't want this to be a Sentera commercial. I just think in general, I think they've all become just simpler and to operate and more dependable. The challenge is the data, and the sensors we build and the technology that we're focused on is really about data analytics on the sensor head and producing a result before you ever have to move any data. And if you can do that, you can still have access to the raw data if you want to use that for research purposes. But if you're trying to do something on a commercial level where you're trying to use this to make good decisions quickly, that's probably the direction that most people want to go, and we expect to see more and more of that.
Any questions from the audience? I'd like to ask the panelists, or I could ask more questions. But if there's any, yes, well,
I'll just go ahead and shout for now. That's fine. So, several of the speakers today talked about image collection, processing. Those were some of your initial comments. But as Dan was alluding to, in the future, drones may be able to do much more in terms of actually responding to some of these invasive species threats. So Monika, I'd like to start with you and say, beyond just the image collection piece, what would you like to do with the drone? And then in response, folks from Sentera, if you would say, how feasible is that?
Thank you. All right, so we'd like drones to do many things to make our lives easier and better. It turns out I'm lazy too. So sample collection would be huge, to be able to have a drone have that robotic capability to be able to fly over an area and collect samples. Now, what a sample means can be really different. So for some species, that might be a leaf sample. For some woody species, maybe that's a lot larger and might be a lot harder to obtain. But being able to sample fields goes way beyond invasive species management. There are much broader applications of that. So that technology would be useful for many different potential applications. I would be very interested in having software that could process these images and map infestations, drawing polygons around infestations or points if it's like single plant, and have that precision. So that would come in post-processing. I would love for drones to be able to do herbicide treatments. So, maybe we aren't quite ready for the flamethrower, but are we ready for herbicide ballistic technology with a drone? I don't know. But even still, I know there has been some work done with herbicide treatments. I think Dan was talking about that. So that's something we have not explored, but there are areas where it's very difficult to physically access the target species, and that's where herbicide treatment could be really, really effective. As a very novice user of image processing software, the extent to which that could be integrated with other software that we use, like we do use Google really extensively, and I'm curious as to where Google is at with all of this technology. I doubt they're like sitting on the sidelines, so I'm just curious as to what they might be working on. And then we also use an application called EdMaps, the Early Detection and Distribution Mapping System. So that's where all of our this is across agencies. This is where our invasive plant data are housed. So the extent to which we could integrate with that would be really valuable, to be able to integrate monitoring data with software that we're already using. We've talked about revisiting and how we do that really accurately. So that's certainly of interest too, to do long-term monitoring. And so I don't know exactly what that means in terms of like saving a flight path, because we probably wouldn't have the same aircraft, right? Aircraft keep improving. We wouldn't be using necessarily the same technology. So how do you accurately do a revisit over multiple years? And then certainly this limitation that we've all talked about of having to keep the aircraft within line of sight is a huge limitation, and that's been talked about a lot. I'm curious as to whether drones could be built kind of like newer cars are, where they have sensors to adjust to what's around them. So like, because you've seen a lot of application in forestry situations where you have height changes, not just due to tree canopies, but also elevation changes. And so to what extent could a drone adjust for that? Or maybe they already do and I just don't know it. Okay, Dan is saying they already do it and I just don't know it. But that's certainly of interest. And then I'm also interested in sharing images. Like if there was talk of a library for, really keeping track of individual fingerprint wavelengths, but I'm also interested in, could I, search a certain area and see images that many different people have collected. You know, maybe I don't need to survey this because somebody else already did, and I can get the information that I need from images that are already available. So having, you know, more sharing of images is also of interest. So all of this would make my life a lot easier.
Sure. So I'll add a little to that. So the question was, what are some things what other things do we wish drones could do, or where is the technology heading other than just remote sensing and remote imaging? Sometimes we talk about how, well, a drone's never going to turn a wrench, but I don't know. Maybe someday. I'm a drone guy, and I've been doing it a long time, but in some ways I've also been a bit of a pessimist on some of the hype. There's been a lot of drone hype, and I'm a part of that industry, and so I'm a part of the hype. But 5-6 years ago, there was the 60 Minutes episode about delivery drones with Amazon, and I was a big naysayer. I was like, this is never going to happen. This is silly. Here's all the reasons why this is a hard problem. Well, here we are. They're still working on it. I just checked. Amazon currently has 330 job openings for Prime Air right now. So if anybody's looking for a job, stay here. But you could go work on delivery drones. They're spending $1 billion a year on it. It's a lot. That's a big number, right? So Google, you talked about Google. What's Google doing? Well, a good buddy of mine who was graduated from the U here, he worked for me for a couple of years, and he went to Google and he works on their drone program. Last time I talked to him, he was delivering burritos at Virginia Tech with drones, but they're spending a lot of money on the delivery piece of it. The second most valuable drone company in the world is called Zipline, and they're doing package deliveries in Africa. And when I say they're second most, in terms of valuation, in terms of what is the company worth, they've brought in about $250 million of investment. They're valued at $1.5 billion company value. So they're the number 2 drone company in the world by that measure, and it's purely drone delivery. So doing physical things more than just remote sensing is real, and it is coming. And it may not be the dropping a package on your front door, but it's going to be other things that spawn from that, other ideas that happen. So in precision agriculture, when we got started, the idea was going to be, well, you're going to use drones for nitrogen management. That's the clear use case. That's what we're going to do. Turns out we're still working on that. It's a hard problem. There's some good use cases on how you could do nitrogen management, but we found all sorts of other things along the way. We learned how to count plants. We learned how to identify weeds versus plants. We learned how to, we're now working on weed species identification. And so there's, the journey is, it branches out and it grows, and we keep finding new things, so.
I'll just add, it goes back to the economics. So when you talk about $1.5 billion valuation, it's because they're delivering products. They're doing something that somebody cares about. We count plants or we identify weeds. We've built technology and done 3 years worth of testing now where we've got the ability to identify every weed in the field, and if the equipment's capable of it, it can actually go and only spray the weed. Exact same efficacy, 50 to 80% reduction in herbicide uses. It's an amazing technology. Those are the kinds of things that are going to ultimately affect all sorts of other industries, and it's going to be, what are the economics that drive that?
So if that camera and that applicator can be on the same platform with a Jetson or something, so you can do that on-platform processing, you can make that determination of weed or other thing that you want to spray in real time, and cut out, the in-between steps. It doesn't have to be 2 different drone operations when potentially you can fly over, do your detection, your onboard processing, and your application all at the same time. And I think that would be.
That's exactly right. Yeah. One quick point too on that. So we talked. I think Dan, you had talked about spray drones in your presentation. Every year we've sort of asked ourselves, or had people in the industry ask ourselves about spray drones, and internally we ask ourselves, is this the year of the spray drone? And every year so far the answer's been no, except for this year. This year we're saying, oh, maybe, and all you have to do is to look at Asia, and in Asia they've really leapfrogged the technology. They didn't have the precision sprayers. They didn't have $1 million John Deere tractors with individual nozzle control and RTK GPS, but they are making drones. And so they just sort of leapfrog that. And they're doing it, they're spraying herbicides and pesticides all day, every day on thousands and thousands of acres. Well, hundreds of thousands of acres, really. So and that's coming. That's coming here too. So there will be that piece of it anyway, so.
I guess one last question we could take. Go for it.
You talked so much about how this technology is growing at a rapid pace, and I'm kind of worried about like the smartphone conundrum, right? Like I have to buy a new smartphone every year. Where do you see that being with drones? If I purchase a drone now to do some of this image processing, am I going to need a new one with a new camera in 2 years, in 5 years, in 10 years? What's the timeline for that?
Best answer is maybe. I say that sort of tongue-in-cheek. We're pretty firm believers in the fact that the drone is important in getting the sensor in the right location, and then it's a question of what are you doing with the sensor, and how is that data being processed. So oftentimes it might not require that. There are aircraft that are being manufactured today that you can interchange payloads on, and you don't have to do anything about buying a new aircraft. So, but you may want to use a different sensor in order to accomplish a different task. And at that point, then you will probably have to. So there'll be some mix and match. Oftentimes it might even be the same sensor and it's different software or new techniques have come out with data analytics. So I think all of those things will have their place. And so maybe.
All right, I guess we're just out of time, so let's call it an end there. Let's thank our panelists. Now I'll hand it back to Rob.
Thank you. This was a really great discussion. So I first of all just want to thank you all for attending. I've really taken a lot away from the meeting today, and it stimulated a lot of ideas. I hope it has for you too. And so one of the next steps in thinking about those ideas is to be thinking about the possibility of submitting a research proposal or teaming up with folks here at the university to develop such a proposal. Our center calls for more research related to invasive species, particularly in the area of detection and distribution of invasives. And clearly all of the technology that you've heard about really relates to that priority theme. So that call will come out in January, and so we're really looking for innovative, exciting proposals to help move the game forward. The other part too is though, please stay in touch with us. We would love to hear other issues that people are having around invasive species, and so please either contact myself, Heather, or Dana in the center, or interact with us through all the various social media. We're very excited about that. So again, thank you. It's been a great day. Speakers, if you would all hang around for a few minutes, that would be great as well. So thank you.